I'm Rabbi Jonathan Crane, and it's a pleasure to join Rabbis for Human Rights North America and Just Visions looking at the role of nonviolence in the Judaic textual tradition. It is improper for us to assume that the Jewish tradition is pacifist, all told, because pacifism is itself a belief system that all kinds of violence, especially lethal violence, are improper, morally wrong, if not sinful. Judaism does endorse the notion of using some forms of force in terms of self-defense and also in terms of intervention defense. And it's preferable, according to the rabbinic textual tradition, to pursue the most non-injurious kinds of intervention or self-defense possible, but it does grant permission to ramp up the kind of intensity of those tactics to injurious, if not lethal, defense. But using lethal defense is, in and of itself, a last resort kind of tactic. When we turn to the issue of nonviolence itself, we should remember that there are many different kinds of nonviolence. There are, of course, structural kinds of violence, and those can be resisted nonviolently through mass civil disobedience and also personal noncompliance with rules and regulations. But as of this issue right now, when we are talking about a territorial dispute between two populations residing in the same area, I think it would be useful for us to hone in and focus on a particular text that speaks specifically to this issue of disputed territory. And I'm thinking of in particular Genesis chapter 13. And let me read a few verses from the Torah that speak about this issue. It was from Egypt that Abram went up into the Negev with his wife and all that he possessed, with his nephew Lot. Now Abram was very rich in cattle, silver, and gold. Lot, who went up with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support them, staying all together. For their possessions were so great that they could not remain together. And there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Avram's cattle and those of Lot's cattle. Avram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, or between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Let us separate. If you go north, I will go south. If you go south, I will go north." Lot looked around him, and he saw how well watered the whole plain of the Jordan, all of it was, all the way to the Zoar, like the garden of Adonai, like the land of Egypt. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they parted from each other. Avram remained in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. This text in Genesis chapter 13, I think, deserves a closer look. If we take a close look at how Avram assesses their situation, he identifies their problem without any bias and without claiming superiority or any prior claim to the land that they were mutually dwelling in. He understood that the escalating conflict between his clansmen and cattlemen and Lot's clansmen and cattlemen was based on limited territory. They could not reside in the same space together without conflict arising and escalating. This led him then to reveal to Lot the motivation, the underlying basic rationale why a creative, nonviolent solution needed to be found. And that is the phrase, Ki anashim achim anachnu, for we are brothers. We are kinsmen, he said to his nephew. And because we are kinsmen, we need to be able to resolve this conflict, this intractable conflict, in a creative, nonviolent way. And so what did Avram propose? He proposed a creative solution that involved no escalation of fisticuffs or into other forms of violence, but rather a nonviolent win-win situation. It was not a zero-sum solution. He said to his nephew, "Look at the land about us. You can choose. If you go north, I will go south. If you go east, I will go west." And his solution was, let us separate. And he gave to Lot the privilege of first choice. He gave to his younger, less wealthy, and perhaps less mature nephew the opportunity to identify those resources that he felt that he needed for the betterment of his community and his clan, and he gave him the opportunity to identify the territory that he preferred and let him go to that territory. And in so doing, they parted. V'yipradu ish me'al achiv. That these two men separated from their brothers. And Avram remained in the land of Canaan while Lot went into the land of Jordan. This story, I suggest, reveals to us an ancient impulse within the Judaic textual tradition that when there is a real conflict on the ground between competing communities, that a solution that involves no violence whatsoever, that does not revolve around any sort of prior claim of superiority or privilege from some sort of claim that God had given the land to one community and not the other, but rather that sitting down with these people with whom we have a serious conflict and identify that, first of all, we are related because not only through blood, but also through our shared humanity, a nonviolent solution is going to be the best way to resolve our conflict. And indeed, it was through this conflict that not only were Lot and Avram able to separate in a peaceful manner and live peacefully side by side, but it was after this, and it was only after this, that God spoke to Avram and said, indeed, the land that you are dwelling in, the land of Canaan, this is now going to be your inheritance. It was not before this that Avram received that divine blessing. That is one instance of a territorial conflict, where the textual tradition encourages us to consider nonviolent, non-lethal conflict resolution. Another situation that's relevant for the issue of this particular documentary, looking at the displacement of people from their homes, comes from the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses reveals a whole litany of rules and regulations that Jews should take to heart when they engage in kinds of transactions. Specifically, Moses instructs the people in chapter 24, when you make a loan of any sort to your countrymen, you must not enter his house to seize the pledge owed you. Rather, you must remain outside while the man to whom you have made the loan brings the pledge out to you. That is, we are not allowed, Jews of any sort, be it a member of the government, the police force, or even regular citizens, we are not allowed to enter another person's home even if they owe something to us. Their home is sacrosanct, and it needs to be protected and given privileged status. But Moses doesn't end there. He does not end by saying that that person's home should be protected, a protected realm, and we should not invade it. He goes on to say, if that person is needy, you shall not go ahead and sleep or keep that person's pledge, but rather you should return that pledge to him before sundown, that he may sleep with his cloth and therefore bless you, and it will be to your merit before Adonai your God. For in returning this pledge to that individual before sunset, that needy individual will find reason to bless you. And Moses does not even end with that. He then goes on to articulate an overarching principle that these rules manifest. And that principle is, you shall not abuse a needy or destitute laborer, whether a fellow countryman or a stranger in one of the communities of your land. Rather, you must pay him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is needy and urgently depends upon it. Else he will cry out to Adonai against you, and you will incur guilt. The principle here is that no matter where we go in this world, there will always be poor, the needy, the disenfranchised, and we need to do everything that we can to protect their basic needs. That means that if they have worked for us, we pay them immediately. If we have borrowed something from them, we return it to them immediately. If we are living next to them and it impinges upon their well-being, upon their orchards, upon their capital investments, we need to move out of the way and return them to their prior status. For, as Moses says here in Deuteronomy chapter 24, it is our obligation to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to live in their own homes without being unrightfully impinged upon. These are just a few of the bases in the Jewish textual tradition that found the notion that nonviolent conflict resolution is a strong piece of the Judaic textual tradition. These few sources from Genesis and from Deuteronomy point to an overarching theme in the Judaic textual tradition, that Judaism endorses nonviolent conflict resolution. Let me conclude by saying that Judaism endorses creating a society that is both just and peace, that has both tzedek and shalom embedded in it. That means that Jews and non-Jews should work through nonviolent conflict resolution means to resolve their differences, attend to their conflicts, and create new laws and legislation that will maintain and manage their conflicts in a nonviolent way. And this is the way that our society, your society, and any society on the face of this earth will be able to live peacefully side by side.